police. They fluoridate a murder and they say it's for your teeth. They calling for the murder of the rights of free speech. Cease and desist cause the system is weak.
Systematic review, the level at which you're selecting is quality. So, in my opinion, it's okay not to look at low quality studies. And what we do, again, we do look at every high quality study, and there is really a consensus in the high quality studies. Now, if you wanted an opinion on those other studies, that would be another type of systematic review that could be done. But essentially, that's the selection criteria we use. So, for example, in the reviews that we have been doing on a regular basis, we try as much as possible to look at comparator studies, so studies where there's an intervention and a comparator group, studies that have a systematic review component, so that they, again, use that same sort of quality criteria when they're looking at studies. As you're probably aware, there is a significant amount of information available online from a range of sources on this sort of issue, and there's no quality barrier to what gets put online. So it's fairly easy to find some low quality studies online.
And if I could just thank you, I totally can appreciate the concerns that you're expressing, and I'm sure that most of you share, is the issue of trying to sort of sift out the information, sift through it, and determine what's valid and what's not. And one of my colleagues once told me that the current problem we have is not getting information, it's vetting information. And I think that's the big issue that we deal with all of us in all of our lives in terms of trying to deal with many of these complex issues. And there can always be more data, generated, but we always have to make decisions based on what we have right now at this point in time. And furthermore, we have to apply some scientific principles to that data to determine whether or not it is likely that there may be something that is found in the future based on a whole lot of different criteria that we use. And so, again, I feel very confident that through that vetting process that we've engaged in within public health, that we are providing you with our best advice. Certainly at this point in time, and I have no reason to believe, based on that review, that view would in fact change into the future either.
So we'll hear what's said today, and of course we're not making a decision today, but it just makes me awfully nervous when we get this kind of a coordinated, not necessarily coordinated, but a number of folks coming before us, and papers from Great Lakes United, an important non-government organization here in the Great Lakes, Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, groups that you generally tend to pay attention to, at least I do, on a variety of issues. Pesticides in the past was, Kate had views on that I shared. So it just makes me nervous on this issue. I hope we're on the right path, and I hope 5-10 years from now we don't go, oh my goodness, we're into the asbestos situation, or maybe not the same magnitude, but the kind of things that Councillor Whitehead raised. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor, and I have Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Nice to meet you, Dr. King, and Dr. Mackey. Thanks for your opening remarks. Just a couple of questions for both of the presenters, Mr. Mayor. I'm a provincial response and local response, and 2 questions. Through you to Dr. King provincially. Toxicology studies, Dr. King, are they done by the province, or if so, yes, are they available to this Board of Health? If not, do you rely on any toxicology studies in terms of your opinion? Mr. Mayor, through to Dr. King first. Can you help me with that, please? And then I'll ask Dr. Mackey from a local standpoint.
Thank you very much for the question, and there is a range of types of studies that are looked at, what we would call epidemiologic data, which are more population-based data, toxicologic data, and other data that are reviewed to determine whether or not we believe there is any kind of a causal relationship between fluoride and the amount added to our water supplies and any harmful effects. And so the full range of literature certainly is considered by the organizations that do this on a regular basis.
Dr. Mackey, please, on that question locally, through you, Mr. Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the question about toxicology is an interesting one in the sense that toxicology can include a range of studies, everything from studies in humans to studies in animals to studies in populations. And one of the ways where there's lots of data is the studies in populations. So, for example, people will do comparator analyses, basically fluoridated, unfluoridated, communities and looking for differences in health status. One study was done recently in Canada comparing bone density in people who lived in Toronto, which is fluoridated, versus those that lived in Montreal, which is not fluoridated, and found no difference in impact there. But then there's also in more specific situations, for example, if you're looking at a cancer risk or a risk of a specific disease, you can often use animal models to test toxicological principles. So, example, when it was thought that thyroid diseases might be caused by water fluoridation, mice were exposed in the laboratory setting to fluoride at levels that would mimic water fluoridation, and found that there's no relationship. That's the sort of toxicological study that is then, based on margins of safety, is extrapolated to the human population. So there's a range of toxicological studies we've done.
Okay, appreciate that. And Mr. Mayor, my second question to both the presenters. Oral health reports, provincially, are they done? And if they're done, are they available, Dr. King, to this Board of Health, please? Through you, Mr. Mayor, then I'll ask Dr. Mackey the same question locally.
So, as the Chief Medical Officer of Health of the Province of Ontario, I have a legislative responsibility to speak to the public, and I have a responsibility to produce an annual report every year. But I also have an ability to be able to produce special reports on topics of interest, and that's why I chose oral health, was because I felt it was really, frankly, a neglected area, and one where there needed to be a much greater understanding of what the links are between overall oral health and outcomes. And I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry,
So, Dr. King, the fact you're speaking to it, is there then some kind of formal report that could be made, that's in writing, made available to this Board of Health?
I have made a statement on fluoridation, and I'm quite happy, specifically on fluoridation, I'm quite happy to provide that to you, actually, and on that specific topic. But I do, and not to preempt myself, but I am speaking to fluoridation when I release my oral health report as well. So there will be further information in it.
Thank you, Dr. King. And lastly, Dr. Mackey, same question, and probably most importantly to our local citizens and our taxpayers. Does our public health department do oral health reports? If we do, are they available? If not, why not? Could we possibly take that under advisement if we don't do them? Mr. Mayor, through you, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we examine our oral health data annually and try to identify trends or any issues where we can adapt our programs to improve our ability to meet the oral health needs of our citizens. We don't report those to the Board of Health. So,
is that something, depending on how this discussion goes today, Mr. Mayor, that possibly this Board of Health could direct our public health staff to take under advisement and provide that kind of reporting in the future, Mr. Mayor? Through to Dr. Mackey, would you be open to that?
Certainly. What, through you, Mr. Mayor, might be most valuable is to do a report this year, and then if the board indicates that this is the sort of report that they'd be interested in seeing more regularly, then consider doing so at that point.
Appreciate that very much, Dr. Mackey. Maybe the clerk could just note that for later in the day, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. To you, to Dr. Mackey, Dr. King. Just reading through all this material is very overwhelming. And I know you guys have medical degrees, and I appreciate that, and I respect it. And I have some other information from people that have medical degrees. It's very confusing. So my main thing here is I have to ask both of you, because Dr. Mackey, you represent the city, our city. Is the fluoride in drinking water safe for children?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the fluoride levels are generally set with health of children in mind. Children are most likely to develop fluorosis, which is that white mottling of the teeth that I mentioned. And so it's usually with children in mind that the upper limits of water fluoridation are set, so they're safe for children. Personally, I live in Ward 1, I drink Hamilton water, and I give it to my children every day.
Let me see you walk 1,000 miles in these fucking shoes. Take a view from my perspective if you wanna get a clue. But if you want a fairy tale, go and watch the fucking news. Cause they'll never tell the truth about the power they abuse, and how the money and corruption are the tactics that they use.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.